stop right there. Dry those tears and listen closely. The God who spoke the universe into existence sent me with a message for you today. Don't worry, this is not your end. The storm you see is already bowing. The enemy laughing at you has already failed. And in a moment from now, God is about to step into your situation. Get ready, because everything is about to turn around. If you believe it, shout amen. Worry speaks the vocabulary of defeat because it assumes the future is bigger than the God who controls it. Faith, on the other hand, speaks the syntax of victory because it treats God's power as a settled case, not a possibility. When anxiety occupies the heart, it becomes an agreement signed in fear, declaring that circumstances hold the final authority. But when faith occupies the spirit, it becomes a covenant announcement, proclaiming that God, not the storm, writes the conclusion. Worry magnifies problems, faith magnifies God. Worry counts losses, faith counts promises. A believer cannot carry victory while conversing daily in fear. Words carry legitimacy. When worry speaks, it legitimizes defeat. When faith speaks, it authorizes divine intervention. Even though emotions may shake, faith trains the mind to speak what the Spirit already knows, that God cannot fail, cannot expire, cannot mismanage destinies. Faith does not deny the presence of trouble. It denies its permission to prevail. Anxiety wakes up every morning rehearsing impossibility, but faith wakes up enforcing God's supremacy over the narrative. Faith is not passive optimism. It is spiritual resistance. It rejects anxiety not because life is predictable, but because God is reliable. A worried heart is a heart that forgets the hierarchy, where God sits above systems, oppressors, delays, markets, and medical verdicts. Faith remembers that hierarchy and speaks from its top floor. When faith speaks, it does not ask if a breakthrough will happen. It commands that the existing opposition must bow. Worry negotiates with problems. Faith legislates over them. History has proven repeatedly that God does not operate by panic. Worry comes when control ends. But a believer serves a God whose control never ended in the first place. Worry suggests abandonment, but faith recognizes orchestration. Faith sees every delay as divine positioning, not denial. It knows that God is not intimidated by a need. Needs are the environment where miracles breathe. Where worry whispers exhaustion, faith answers with endurance. Where worry mutters shame, faith counters with expectation. Faith speaks because silence in the face of fear is permission given to anxiety to rule. Strong faith does not shout because it's loud. It shouts because it's certain. The believer speaks victory even in spiritual trembling, because faith is not powered by feelings but by revelation. Anxiety asks, what if it collapses? Faith answers, even if it collapses, God restores beyond ruins. Worry stands at the gate of uncertainty and trembles. Faith stands at the same gate and prophesies. Worry drains strength. Faith mobilizes heaven. One activates paralysis. The other activates power. To reject worry is not to reject reality. It is to reject its dominion. When faith speaks, it speaks from a higher government, the invisible kingdom that outranks visible obstruction. Faith does not wait for symptoms to change before speaking victory. It speaks victory so symptoms can receive notice to obey. Faith is not advice, it is activation. It dislodges anxiety by refusing its dialect. Anxiety speaks hesitation, faith speaks conclusion. Anxiety speaks temporary defeat, faith speaks eternal governance. A believer must intentionally retrain their confession, because while anxiety petitions for rescue, faith announces the rescuer's authority before it even petitions. Battles are not random interruptions, they are deliberate environments engineered for divine demonstration. A challenge is not proof of abandonment, it is evidence of divine attention. In the economy of God, warfare becomes public advertisement for a coming wonder. The enemy does not attack what is empty. He attacks what carries value. The intensity of the battle reveals the size of the threat the enemy perceives in your future. Where there is no future, there is no resistance. But where destiny carries assignment, opposition rises to contest its manifestation. Yet, the believer serves a God who turns confrontation into coronation. Battles often arrive like final verdicts, whispering collapse, shame, and impossibility. But God permits conflict not so destiny can be terminated, but so it can be validated. Without Pharaoh, Moses is not revealed. Without lions, Daniel is not distinguished. Without the furnace, the priceless nature of the 3 Hebrew men is never publicly certified. And without Goliath standing loud and proud, David never becomes an eternal testimony. The champion in you is introduced through adversity, not convenience. Many believers pray to avoid battles, not realizing that the miracle they seek needs a stage. Triumph is not demonstrated in the absence of conflict, but in its overthrow. There is a hierarchy in every battle. Situations appear powerful only because God has not yet spoken his final word. Battles roar until God arises. The moment he stands, the noise of opposition becomes the footnote of history. The storms that look permanent bow when the God of suddenly intervenes. Satan may initiate the fight, but only God governs the outcome. The believer must shift from seeing problems as threats to seeing them as notice boards, announcing that heaven is about to respond. Your pain is not pointless, it is prophetic currency. God spends challenges to purchase revelation, testimony, elevation, and spiritual identity. When the battle begins, human analysis predicts defeat. Natural intelligence debates solutions. But faith intercepts panic and declares divine override. Battles confuse human logistics, but they clarify divine mechanics. That is the mystery. God does not bow to the pressure you are under. He uses it to reveal the power you carry. Every battle is temporary because it lives under God's timetable, not man's alarm. Opposition may delay a man, but cannot dislodge the God who authored the assignment. Battles challenge your peace, but cannot dethrone your promise. The believer must therefore reject intimidation and embrace revelation. Every conflict carries an introduction. The question is not, why is this happening? But who is this revealing? Battles push the believer into a place where dependence shifts from earth to eternity. You lose reliance on fragile strength and discover inexhaustible divinity. The enemy expects fear to interpret the attack. God expects faith to interpret his blueprint behind it. Opposition thinks it found you unprepared. God knows it located you appointed. It is in warfare that supernatural capacity is tested and proven. Press impossible situations long enough, and they will confess the supremacy of their Creator. Battles insist you bow. God insists you rise. Opposition predicts humiliation. God engineers announcement. You entered the fight unknown. You will exit the fight unforgettable, not by struggling to survive, but by allowing God to reveal himself superior to what once threatened you. Conflict may rise, but it is your testimony that will remain standing. Mockery is the noise an unprepared enemy makes when they misread your season. When people laugh at your struggle, it is not because your story is finished, but because their understanding is limited. Mockery is always premature because it reacts to the visible chapter while ignoring the invisible script. Faith works behind closed curtains long before testimony appears on open platforms. Those who mocked you saw the pain you walked through, but they did not see the God who walked with you. They observed your losses, but ignored your backing. They analyzed your situation with human conclusions, forgetting that heaven does not submit to earthly assumptions. Mockery is painful because it feels personal, but it never carries final authority. People laugh when they think they have measured your limits, but God laughs because he knows they have misjudged your coverage. The world mocks what looks weak. Heaven endorses what is called. A believer's strength is not estimated by momentary hardship, but by divine sponsorship. When men mock, they treat struggle as your identity. When God responds, he treats it as your history. Mockery targets your confidence, but God targets your outcomes. Mockery tries to puncture faith before the breakthrough speaks. God allows mockery so that when victory rises, it has witnesses, not just participants. Mockery is often born from comparison. When your life does not match someone's expectation or timeline, they conclude failure. But divine purpose cannot be graded on borrowed standards. God writes destinies individually, not collectively. The people who mocked you did not create you, did not call you, and cannot conclude you. Their laughter came from observation, not revelation. They laughed based on odds. God will bless you based on covenant. Mockery counts probabilities. God answers by power. It is the same situation, but interpreted by different authorities. Earth talks. Heaven moves. Mockery is engineered to produce shame, but shame is powerless when God decides glory. The enemy sometimes uses people as megaphones. not because the people are powerful, but because words carry influence when a heart is unguarded. Mockery feeds insecurity. When a believer forgets that seasons turn and God does not explain battles before he displays victory. Mockery hopes your tears interpret silence as surrender. Faith interprets silence as strategy. When faith speaks, mockery loses relevance. Trials may make you cry privately, but testimonies will make others testify publicly. It is not the mockery that matters. It is the announcement that overwrites it. God uses mockers as future proofreaders of his faithfulness. When your turnaround finally manifests, on the same voices that questioned you will become voices confirming that God does not fail. The same eyes that judged your warfare will become eyes witnessing your wonder. This is not poetic irony. It is divine protocol. God does not elevate secretly. He elevates strategically. He does not restore quietly. He restores noticeably. Your life will not just change, it will speak loudly enough for mockery to convert into astonishment. Mockers speak too soon because they track progress with sight. God responds right on time because he governs progress by purpose. The difference between laughter and congratulations is a season called suddenly. The same mouth that mocked you will soon struggle to pronounce the size of the evidence. What was mocked as collapse will be congratulated as conquest. What was laughed at as loss will be remembered as launching ground. No mockery survives divine proof. No doubt endures prophetic outcomes. When glory speaks, shame evaporates and opposition becomes testimony material. Divine turnaround does not crawl, it erupts. God is not bound to gradual permission from natural systems. His interventions are not scheduled by human expectation, approved by institutional consensus, or timed by visible feasibility. Suddenness is not haste, it is divine compression, a shortening of processes that should have taken years, a collapsing of steps that were designed to stretch, and an acceleration that makes logic look lazy. The mechanics of God operate outside the speed limits of earthly protocol. When heaven decides to move, explanation becomes unnecessary because evidence becomes undeniable. Natural turnarounds negotiate with time, but divine turnarounds dominate it. Humans ask for how long? God answers by no. Suddenly is heaven's signature when God intends to make disbelief feel embarrassed. A believer must understand that God is not late simply because reality is loud. Sometimes heaven is silent, not because power is absent, but because it is loading an arrival that will not require introduction. Many believers misinterpret silence as inactivity, yet God works in the invisible realm where preparation is perfected before manifestation is permitted. The blessing may look delayed in appearance, but it is not delayed in assignment. God incubates miracles out of sight, so they are delivered beyond argument. Suddenness often shocks because it bypasses ordinary patterns. The world is trained to honor progress when it is predictable, measurable, and progressive. God honors progress when it is purposed, appointed, and revealed. Suddenness is not confusion. Suddenness is revelation that refuses to be ignored. When God accelerates your life, those tracking you by common reasoning will lose your timeline because they never had access to your blueprint. The God who commands suddenly does not need precedent to validate his method. He becomes the precedent. Sudden divine movement does not ignore natural preparation. It overrides natural restriction. Joseph was prepared in obscurity before the palace saw him suddenly. Hannah travailed privately before motherhood honored her publicly. The disciples labored confused until Pentecost arrived suddenly, transforming fear into proclamation. Suddenly announces that heaven outranks impossibility. Suddenly declares that covenant overrules contradiction. Suddenly means God is replacing natural permission with supernatural authority. What makes suddenly powerful is not speed, it is superiority. God is not rushing, he is outranking. When God moves suddenly, he is not reacting to circumstances, he is responding to covenant insistence. A suddenly season means God has declared that the wrestling stage is over and the evidence stage has begun. Many believers expected a gradual endorsement. God is releasing a governmental interference from heaven that does not require earthly signatures. Suddenly means that the rules changed while the mockers were sleeping. In a suddenly turnaround, barriers become irrelevant because power becomes dominant. Mountains don't collapse slowly. They dissolve instantly when spoken to by divine authority. Favor doesn't cue, it locates. Glory doesn't rehearse, it arrives. When God shifts your life suddenly, earthly watchers do not witness a man struggling to rise. They witness a God refusing to lose. Suddenly is the moment where delay gives birth to wonder, where stagnation evacuates the boardroom, and where the immune system of destiny rejects impossibility with finality. To step into suddenly is to reject paralysis. You cannot speak hesitation and suddenly in the same breath. Suddenly is escorted by a believer's agreement, delivered through divine command and validated by heaven's public proof. It does not ask permission from economy, medicine critics, or timelines. It arrives heavy enough to silence debate. Faith does not expire simply because the answer has not yet appeared. Your season cannot be canceled because it was not authored by human momentum, emotional stability, or earthly validation. It was written by divine purpose. Breakthroughs are not lost in transition, and answers are not forgotten in heaven's filing system. When a believer worries that their moment has expired, they are misinterpreting the nature of the God they serve. God does not abandon assignments halfway, nor does he mismanage prophetic timing. What looks delayed to a man may already be ratified in eternity. A believer must understand that seasons are spiritual dispensations, not emotional impressions. You may feel tired, but tiredness does not outrule God's timetable. You may see opposition, but opposition does not gain administrative authority over a destiny that has already been approved In heaven, cancellation is a human concept. God does not cancel what He called, He completes it. Anxiety interprets silence as defeat. Faith interprets silence as preparation. When you pray, and the answer has not yet erupted physically, it does not mean God is absent. It means the invisible realm is finishing the work before the visible realm receives notice to confirm it. Breakthrough is not a rumor that wanders. It is a spiritual package that locates its recipient. Your prayers did not fall to the ground. They entered a realm where answers are engineered before they are announced. Angels do not lose direction, and God does not misplace recipients. Your season is not canceled. It is unfolding. But unfolding does not always announce itself audibly. Some miracles move quietly until the moment they must arrive loudly. God allows this so testimony does not sound like exaggeration, but like evidence. You must also reject the intimidation of unfinished chapters. You are currently living inside a process, not a conclusion. What makes a believer unstoppable is not the absence of struggle. It is the refusal to define themselves by its temporary voice. Trouble speaks, but it does not conclude. Delay talks, but it does not decide. Seasons are not over because reality argues loudly. They are over when God punctuates them prophetically. If He has not said it is finished, then the testimony is still legally active. God operates from a throne that is never surprised, never pressured, never confused, and never out of options. Faith sees hidden orchestration. Worry sees visible chaos. One concludes by sight, the other concludes by revelation. You must speak from the top of the hierarchy, not from the noise of the storm. Your God is not asleep over your case. Heaven is not confused about your address. Angels are not fatigued from delivering your answers. The kingdom governing your destiny is not shaken by the courtroom of human reasoning. If the situation is still challenging you, it means it has not yet met the God who will conclude it. The longer the wrestling, the louder the announcement when elevation finally arrives. Your season remains active because purpose keeps it alive. What heaven authored, time cannot cancel, systems cannot veto, mockery cannot erase, and fear cannot rewrite. Deliverance from worry comes when a believer steps back into spiritual certainty and remembers that while reality reports temporary frustration, only God holds conclusive authority over destiny's punctuation. And if He has not yet spoken His final amen over your situation, then your answer is still in motion, still targeted, still appointed, still imminent, and still unstoppable.